Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, where we take an in-depth look at how news about Taiwan is impacting the world. I'm James Chater. Last month, the US and the Philippines conducted their largest ever joint military exercises. It came shortly after Manila granted the US access to more of its military bases, including some on territory close to Taiwan. Today, we're discussing how this developing US Philippine relationship could impact the region's security and especially Taiwan's. To discuss this, we're joined by Jay Batongbacal. Jay is a maritime affairs expert and associate professor at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, James, and I'm happy to be here.
First, I want to zoom in and take a look at where some of these bases are located. The US gained access to 4 new military bases in the Philippines, taking it to a total of 9. TaiwanPlus reporter Rick Glowett recently travelled to the Batanes Island, where the largest ever US Philippine drills just took place. Here's an excerpt from his report.
Last month, US and Philippine forces practiced landing drills on the Batanes coast, part of the largest ever joint military exercises between the two countries, as the United States and its allies face up to China's increasing military ambitions in the region. 20,000 indigenous Ivatan people live on these islands, which are geographically closer to Taiwan than Manila. Taiwan is less than 200 kilometers from these shores, and the waterway separating it from the Philippines, the Basha Channel, is now a major military flashpoint. China, which claims Taiwan as its own, has been increasingly sending its military boats and planes into this choke point as it ups threats to invade Taiwan.
Jay, first of all, I want you to give us a bit of background to these developments and why the location of some of these bases is provoking some controversy.
Well, this is actually just a continuation. It's a resumption of the implementation of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which was signed way back in 2014. That's almost a decade ago. And this was intended to improve the Philippines' capability for external defense and to enhance its maritime domain awareness in light of the rise in tensions between the Philippines and China at the time over Scarborough Shoal and the Calayan Island Group and what we now call the West Philippine Sea. And implementation of that agreement was actually delayed by the previous administration, which chose to try to get friendly and accommodating towards China. So now, under the new administration, we're simply catching up with this agreement. As to its location and supposedly provocative action, I don't think that it's really just because these new locations are close to Taiwan particularly, but when you think about it, it's really because the Philippines itself is close to Taiwan. We're the closest country to Taiwan down south, and any potential incidents or contingencies occurring in Taiwan inevitably would also affect us.
We'll come back to some of those issues related to Taiwan in a moment, but I want to kind of zoom in on this relationship between the US and the Philippines specifically, and what you think it is that's really driving this kind of refreshed engagement between the two countries.
Well, I think it's really the accumulation of various pressures or factors over the years. First, as I mentioned, the previous administration tried to be friendly and accommodating to China, but China failed to reciprocate. It made a lot of promises, most of which were unfulfilled. They were basically failed promises of assistance and aid. Also, despite the friendly policy, China continued to increase its pressure on the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea or South China Sea. They still kept on with interfering with Philippine resource activities, particularly our fishermen, such that now they're unable to fish profitably even, and they're always afraid and intimidated by the Chinese vessels, whether it's Coast Guard or fishing vessels or maritime militia. Philippine government vessels have been interfered with. Even our oil exploration has had to be stopped because of Chinese interference. So all of these factors, I think, have culminated and led to this shift.
What's at stake for these communities, kind of from the economic perspective, that this enhanced security relationship is trying to protect, specifically here in the Philippines?
Well, food security primarily, because we still have many coastal communities that derive their sustenance, their subsistence from the sea. And definitely along the coast that faces the South China Sea, they have historically been accessing the waters there all the way up to Scarborough Shoal and the Calayan Island Group for fishing. No? And now they've been denied that, no? Due to Chinese intimidation. And more than that, China is even destroying the very basis of that livelihood by carrying out destructive fishing activities that totally destroy these very productive and environmentally sensitive coral reefs. We've also seen China essentially being an obstacle for our energy security because they are preventing us from exploring for petroleum within our own EEZ and continental shelf without even offering anything to compensate for the foregone opportunities. And then over the long term, I think government is also quite aware that China's increasing assertiveness in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea could potentially endanger our access through maritime trade because our sea lines of communication, almost all of them go through the South China Sea in order to access major ports in Manila and Luzon. So all of this trade goes to other countries, particularly Japan, Korea, India, and Europe. No? All of that could be endangered. So I think that's really what's at stake for us. No?
So, how has all this activity, this enhanced security relationship with the US, been received by Filipinos?
Public support has always been strong in favor of engagement with the United States and its allies and cooperation with other countries, all the external powers. Despite 6 years of Duterte and his friendliness towards China, that has always been the low point in his policies. The public has always favored a stronger stance and a more pragmatic posture, engaging in friendships with allies and friends and traditional partners. No?
Well, Ferdinand Marcos recently visited Washington where he met with US President Joe Biden. Following their meeting, he had this to say about the US access to the Philippine bases.
No, the U.S. has not proposed any kind of action for the Philippines in terms of taking part in the defense of Taiwan or in any other affirmative action that the United States might feel they need to take. As I said, it's a defensive. It is of a defensive nature, and it is of maybe a civil defense nature. When I talk about disasters and I talk about the evacuation of our Filipino nationals.
Jay, Marcos there said the US hadn't asked the Philippines to help defend Taiwan, but do you think the country would become embroiled in any potential future conflict over Taiwan?
Well, I think Marcos is simply trying to assuage fears being stoked by people who oppose closer Philippine-US relations. Because really, when you look at it, the treaty relationship between the two countries are based on defense, not offense. Also, he's referring to the one of the primary purposes of EDCA, which includes humanitarian and disaster relief operations, HIDR, because really the country is prone to a lot of natural disasters. And Typhoon Haiyan demonstrated the destructive force of these disasters on us, our vulnerability, as well as the usefulness of these types of military alliances, not just for purposes of armed conflict, but even civil defense. The Philippines inevitably will be affected by anything that happens in the Taiwan area. The Philippines cannot avoid being affected by that. So it's only proper that we take steps to cooperate in deterring an unwanted situation. After all, we are the closest country. Anyone fleeing from the conflict zone, civilians or whatever, will most likely head south towards the Philippines, and therefore we will absorb the humanitarian impact of that. Our trade will suffer. We trade a lot with Taiwan in terms of agriculture and electronic goods, which are very, very important for us as a developing country. and also as also that also contributes to our food security and our supplies. We have a lot of workers who work in Taiwan who provide us with remittances and economic support. And these workers, overseas Filipino workers, since the 1990s have been seen as a very, very important pillar of our foreign policy and activities. And as I mentioned earlier, the maritime trade, which provides us with access to the goods of the world, a lot of them passes through the Taiwan Straits as well as the Luzon Straits close by. So there's no way we cannot be somehow affected or perhaps even involved, no, whether actively or passively.
And so is it fair to say that the issue of Taiwan has become much more pressing in political defense circles? And is it fair to say that the issue of Taiwan has also become more pressing for the Filipino public as well? Is this something that kind of cuts through to everyday Filipinos when they kind of look at their geopolitical situation?
I think that for the political circles, those in the political elite, um, quite a number of them are beginning to see the problem. But there's also still quite a number who are in denial and still thinking that non-involvement or neutrality is the only way to go. But in the defense circles, that's where I think there's more serious discussions now, especially with closer defense ties being engaged. I think the military and the defense departments are probably beginning to realize, no, the magnitude of this challenge, no.
There are, of course, as you mentioned, there's a significant overseas Filipino population in Taiwan, more than 150,000. Marcos previously said that his government made contingency plans to evacuate that population during Chinese live-fire drills following Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last year. Do you think that large overseas population that exists in Taiwan presents the Philippine government with a unique dilemma when they're thinking about a Taiwan contingency?
Well, I think in practical terms, the Philippines is used to evacuating nationals from conflict zones simply because we have so many overseas Filipino workers all over the world, no? So these contingency plans, I think, are par for the course. What would be unique in this instance, I think, is really the proximity. We have to move fast and we have to move quickly. And I suspect we will also be facing that challenge of what if other people, particularly Taiwanese people, want to evacuate as well. Given, as I said, we're the closest area. I think that is the one that will present a unique challenge for the Philippines. We've never had a situation where really, really large numbers of people have sought refuge in the Philippines. We've always had an open policy for refugees, like for the Jews during World War II and recently for the Rohingya. But those numbers pale in comparison to the potential numbers that we might see in case of a Taiwan contingency.
I want to go back to one final question, which is you mentioned there that there is a kind of increased level of engagement and increased awareness of the question of Taiwan in the Philippine establishment. Do you think that's a result specifically of Marcos now being in power, or do you think there are other factors at play which have kind of raised the awareness level within Manila?
I think that Marcos being in power does have a lot to do with it because he has actually spoken out about it. He has made his views and opinions known, and he's also engaged with other leaders from other countries. And I think that is something that the previous president did not do very well. And because of that, I think it catches the attention of the economic and political elite and all the circles. No? So at the very least, it gives them something to talk about and think about, more now than ever before.
Jay, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really great conversation. This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. You can find TaiwanPlus on Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you next time.